relationships between humans, such as hunter-gatherers, traditional healers, farmers, artists, and scientists, and plants. And it's set against the backdrop of climate change and threats to the environment today. This idea emerged from various projects I've worked on over the last 15 years or so. The story starts when we at Totem Media, which is a museum design company, had made a few museums, and I had 2 film sequences from some of these projects that I just couldn't get out of my mind. I really wanted to do something with them, but they were so different to each other, and yet both really touched a nerve with their connection to broader truths in South Africa, and they both revolved around plants. One was a rendition of a song by a Dutch Reformed church choir in Northwest, and the other a story told to us in an interview with Rivonia trialist Dennis Goldberg. Between 2014 and 2016, Totem Media was working in Marilyn in Northwest and renovating an old Dutch Reformed church and school into a heritage precinct that presented the history and culture of the Boycott people. We also filmed a few local choirs singing songs, which were mostly religious, except one, which I was told had been sung for generations, since even before the missionaries arrived. This is a praise song to the incredible nutritional value of mabele or sorghum in sustaining the Boycott people nutritionally over many, many years. Music is a powerful means of distilling years and years of positive relationships into incredible beauty. Singing praises to sorghum won't affect the plant genetically, but does raise its profile in the consciousness of people and adds a further layer of identity and culture to traditional communities. So Totem Media spent many years producing exhibitions at Lily's Leaf Museum in Rivonia, Johannesburg. Between 1961 and 1963, Lily's Leaf Farm was the secret headquarters and nerve center of the ANC, SACP, MK, and Congress Alliance. In July 1963, the security police raided Lily's Leaf and caught the leadership of these underground movements. Mandela, who was already in prison for leaving the country illegally, joined the others in what became known as the Rivonia trial. 8 were convicted of treason and sentenced to life. Among them was Dennis Goldberg. In 2018, we interviewed Dennis Goldberg, who had spent 22 years in Pretoria Central Prison, and he hadn't lost an ounce of his idealism. He also spoke of their struggles to be afforded small concessions regarding visits and letters. Near the end of the interview, Dennis told a story of his struggle to be allowed to grow vegetables after growing seedlings from apple pips on his cell's windowsill.
And so I started growing apple pips. I got an apple with the seeds had germinated. So I grew little treelets, and when they started to die, I knew there was one young warder whose father was a mad king gardener. And I said, ask your father if you can do something with them. And then the commanding officer of the prison, Brigadier Kerriker, we'd grown up together, let's put it this way. He saw my windowsill garden. He brought me butter beans to grow. And then the medical orderly brought me some anti-baby tablets, you know. The hormones might help my plants to survive more. And then eventually I said to a new commanding officer, you've got great big plant pots for the use of prisoners. Why can't we grow a garden? And so he sent out a man to get the soil, and he brought us gravel from the side of the road. And the young man, whose father was a mad king gardener, came in with sacks of compost, with seedlings, tomato plants, flower plants, all sorts of things. And so we were able to have a real garden. I said, why did your father send this stuff to me? And he said, his dad said, I don't care what he's done. If he's so keen to have a garden, he must be a good man. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but human, of finding reasons to help. Yeah.
Heartwarming story about how love of plants connected two people separated by prison walls and apartheid ideology. So now I had these two clips that spoke so eloquently to the relationship between people and plants in South Africa. But not only that, in both instances, there's an awareness of the special nature of what plants are bringing to the relationship. And there's an element of praise by humans to the plants, the first in the form of a song and the second in the form of a story. There are many examples of relationships between plants and humans, many that provide comment on colonization, apartheid, and the advance of capitalism in South Africa, that have been good for some species, bad for others, and usually bad for the environment. For example, at Kirstenbosch, the beginnings of colonial segregation can be seen in the first hedge planted by Van Riebeck in 1660 from wild almond trees to keep the koi out of the company gardens. The remains of the hedge are still there today. And the potato boycott of 1959 resulted from harsh slave-like conditions on potato farms in the Bethel area. The boycott forced the government to initiate a commission of inquiry, which led to farmers improving conditions on their farms. Invasive crops like Saligna, black wattle, Port Jackson, and many others that have been imported into South Africa have had a relationship with people here, but hardly one that would inspire praise in the form of songs or art. These relationships are principally exploitative and don't really have the depth of time to elicit a folk or traditional response from humans, whether it be through music, stories, art, or dance. Some of these more negative relationships will form the backdrop to the focus on the positive relationships in the film. I began to think back to other projects I'd been involved with, where there might be other forms of praise heaped on plants. Surprisingly, there were quite a few examples in my own archive. In 2005, while working on film installations for Origin Center at Wits University, we spent 2 weeks working with the San Chunquansi community in the Kalahari. Hunting animals for meat always gets the most attention from people and anthropologists, but plants actually provide 70% of hunter-gatherer nutrition. Most shrubs don't yield very much, and because they fruit at different times of year, The women have a huge knowledge of plant species and where and when to find them. The mongongo nut tree is a large spreading tree found in the Kalahari that towers above most other vegetation. The trees produce so much fruit that they can be knee-deep. The fruit can be knee-deep around the trunk of the trees. And their nuts, besides the fruit, they also have a nut, which is high in oil, very tasty, nutritious, and ripened during the dry months. So we're a key source of food for the San. Sure one, this isn't. Anything I should do to make it move, play? Okay, got it? So the mongongo nut tree is recognized by the Kalahari sand by being the only plant to be the subject of a trance dance. Trance dancers usually praise eland and other animals for their supernatural potency. It is very unusual for a tree to have a trance dance dedicated to it. Here we have people celebrating a bond between a tree and themselves, a bond that, according to archaeological evidence, goes back at least 5,000 years and has been one of the most important and reliable contributors to their diet. It seems odd that the potential of South Africa's indigenous food plants have been neglected in favor of only about 20 domestic imported species of plants such as cabbage, maize, potatoes, tomatoes, etc. This is not true, however, with respect to Southern African traditional medicine, of which there are hundreds, if not thousands, of plants that are used. When the Pilanesberg Game Reserve was created in the late 1970s, the local people were relocated into Bophuthatswana, depriving them of their historical land and the resources it provided. At some stage, traditional healers began to be allowed into the park with armed rangers to protect them. Oh, shit. So that they could gather traditional medicinal plants and pass on their knowledge. Can we have sound?
We women use it when you are about to give birth, so that the child, you should never get a breech presentation when you go. She must come through the head, not breech at all. This is one of what we use.
This is the African potato. And it's discussing how it's used in childbirth to turn breech deliveries around.
go tabola ka leswana mo metsing a maruru go tshela mo thulitheng motho wa nwa toropo e fedile so sena ke penicillin.
Yes, John.
The knowledge of what plant works for what ailment must have taken hundreds of thousand years of trial and error. Some knowledge was passed on from the San, and some knowledge moved down Africa with migrations into the south. In 2009, while filming the Eastern Cape episode of A Country Imagined with Johnny Clegg, Basil Mills took us up to Olive Schreiner's grave on Buffelskorp. On the way there, we stopped at a rock painting for Johnny to do a piece to camera on San rock art. The art on the wall of this shelter was extraordinary, and sorry for the bad photo, in that in addition to eland and people, it also had repeated strange shapes that looked a bit like aloes. Back in Joburg, I was told by rock art experts that this was more likely to be in Buffon distica, which is a powerful poison once used by the San on their arrows. A 2,000-year-old partially mummified body covered in Buffon scales was found in a cave in the Kuocha Mountains, indicating a very long relationship between humans and this plant. More recently, the outer scales of the bulb are used as a dressing for wounds after circumcision and as a hallucinogenic in initiation ceremonies. This is one of the few instances where a plant has been depicted in San rock art in South Africa. Zimbabwe has some trees in their rock art, but there's only about 3 or 4 in South Africa where a plant is depicted, giving some idea of the recognition that the San had of its value and potency. Is that time up? Physiology researcher, okay, so I'll go quickly. This physiology researcher at Wits University, Muzi Maseko, became alarmed at the increasing incidence of hypertension and diabetes among South Africans. And he ran a study where he put people on a diet of just 7 to 5 fruit and vegetables and no sugar. And he can't help praising the healing benefits of fruit and vegetables.
I ran a study for a period of just 1 month. I asked 2 people to eat strictly fruits and vegetables, no sugar, nothing. And then after a month again, they come for a checkup. And it's amazing, the changes we've seen. I've seen one man change from a blood pressure of about 170 over 110 to a blood pressure of 120 over 70. He couldn't believe it.
So we all know the benefits of eating fresh fruit and vegetables, but I wasn't aware of how quickly a change of diet can repair pathology in the human body, and it's good to have the benefits scientifically verified. So whether it be from loss of habitat, global warming, pollution, or other causes, many of the world's plants have recently become extinct or facing extinction in the near future. Conceptual artist Willem Boshoff, who describes himself as in love with trees and plants, learned the scientific names of 5,000 plants facing extinction and made an artwork to memorialize them.
And then I invented what I call garden of words. When the plants are gone, the only thing that will be left will be a name. And by 1996, I had learned 5,000 names. Well, I tried to, you keep forgetting them. So I made, with the names I had in my experience,
Doesn't seem like the
memorial
sound's coming
garden
through,
for
but basically
5,000
he made this artwork
with
of
glass
5,000 plants.
and little labels,
Then he made
so that
another
it would
art.
look
He
as
learned
if somebody had
10,000
sown the
plants of
plants
endangered species,
and
he
they
made
had,
an
they had
artwork
not
of that.
come up.
And then
they
he
were
made
gone.
one of 15,000 endangered plants.
After a few years,
that he
people
learned the
tried to
names
learn
of, and he made
10,000
another
plants.
artwork of that.
And then I made a memorial garden for those plants. Big
This is
sheets,
the
1,000
10,000, and
plants
then
in
the
a
other one
sheet.
will come up.
And if
I
it's
think
in
I'm
the
short
wind,
of
it
time, so I'll
blows and
just
it moves.
conclude now. So it's good to conceive of a film that recycles
As time
material
goes
from
on,
past projects
I get
and
more
has a
excited
positive
and I
message that
learn more
might
stuff
awaken
and
those
more
blind
strange
to the
plants.
value of
I
plants,
had
to
learned
what we are in the
15,000
process
plants.
of losing.
And I made a garden
Yeah,
of
these are
words
some of the
number
scenes
3
of the material I
that
have at
consisted
present.
of
But more will need to
15,000
be
plants
found and researched. Perhaps
made
more
up
traditional
of
and visual art, perhaps more
artificial
stories
poppies,
and poems,
because the
perhaps
poppy is
more
a
dance.
symbol of
What
war
wisdom or
and soldiers
encouragement can
dying.
we find in our
And I
heritage
used
to
handkerchiefs.
help heal this
Printed the
country
names
socially,
of the plants on
politically,
the handkerchief,
ecologically,
because a handkerchief
and
is
ensure
something
these
that you use
meaningful
when you're sad.
relationships with plants continue
So
into the future.
15,000 flowers.
It's
in
absolutely amazing that through
15 flower
transmutation of genes over many years,
on a field,
plants
like
have
on a
evolved
football
certain
field.
features in their leaves, stems, seeds, fruits that are a perfect fit for another type of creature, us, to use in some way, whether biological or cultural, to make our lives better, and then express thanks to the universe for this privilege. And I acknowledge with my earlier reticence that the plants have seduced me. They've got me by the anthers, and I'm overjoyed to go for the ride with this idea for a movie. Thank you.
All this information. Yeah. Thank you very much, Guy. We wish we could consume all what you have, but time is our problem. Carol is waiting. Carol Leff is a PhD in literary studies, and her area of interest is contemporary writing in and of Africa and the African diaspora. Her big project this year is to complete a monograph, the Afropolitan Fibnol, which has been accepted for publication. Carol lives in a log cabin hidden in riverine forest where she is free to hug trees. You can hug the chair next to you to be awake and be ready for Carol's presentation if she's there in the cabin hugging the trees. Thank you. You are welcome, Carol. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Please bear with me, everyone, while I just switch off again to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen with the title on green here?
Yes, we can see. Carol.
Great. So good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. It's been a wonderful series of talks so far, so it's very inspiring. Thank you, everybody. First of all, my paper has very little to do with Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, and yet at the same time, it has everything to do with them. When I first read Deleuze and Guattari, I wondered to myself whether they were perhaps ingesting magic mushrooms when describing rhizomes. Although mycologically speaking, the mycelium of a mushroom is the rhizomorph, not a rhizome. Consider these words from the introductory chapter, Rhizome, in Deleuze and Guattari's book titled 1,000 Plateaus. Multiplicities are rhizomatic and expose arborescent pseudo-multiplicities for what they are. I repeat, multiplicities are rhizomatic and expose arborescent pseudo-multiplicities for what they are. What does this even mean? I'm not even going to begin to translate. So looking for a shortcut to understand Deleuze and Guattari 40-odd years after 1,000 Plateaus was published, I turned to the preface of Natanya Mika and Antonia Zabari's 2020 book titled Radical Botany. They point out in their book that it is the story of a series of imagined allegiances between plants and humans, a speculative form of collaboration across and within modes of being. But why should this even be so radical? Where has the human race gone wrong to lose its connection to nature? Mika and Zabari describe a so-called plant turn, where, and I quote, the plant has moved front and center in a particular critical discourse and has even become an object of academic fashion. With reference to Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the rhizome, Mika and Zabari add that they do not believe that this concept does injustice to trees, or for that matter, has in itself made anyone particularly fond of rhizomatic root systems. Forgive me, I'm not a botanist, just a simple literary scholar. So my paper today is more like good old book club meeting, chat. The wine and snacks will follow later. Just like a plant, this paper started off as a small seed of an idea, and then it grew in unexpected rhizomatic directions. The manner in which I adopted a Deleuzoguattarian approach is based on these two little phrases of theirs from 1,000 Plateaus. The first one, we have been criticized for overquoting literary authors. And second, follow the plants. To the first one, perhaps I too will be criticized for similar reasons, but what I am about to offer is quotations referring to plants gleaned from various texts that I encountered, while at the same time I provide a basic reading of Jacques Lange's 2015 novel titled The Seed Thief. So very simply, The Seed Thief is a novel about a quest. Botanist Maddie Bellany travels from Cape Town, South Africa, to Salvador in Brazil in search of the rare seed of a fictional tree the author names Nuboldia mundi, extinct in the deforested West African area from which it originated. Nuboldia mundi is described in the novel as a cousin of a real tree, Nuboldia laevis, also known as the African border tree. Maddie hopes to find the last existing specimens of Nuboldia mundi in a strongly protected temple garden under the auspices of the Afro-Brazilian cult called Candomblé. Maddie is tasked with bringing the seed back from Brazil to the seed bank in Cape Town where she works. In her book, the author weaves together the secret life of plants, the cutthroat international market, and human spiritual beliefs. The novel highlights the tension created between those who venerate plants and those who are employed by greedy pharmaceutical companies. My reading of this text will focus on plants, on ritual and magic, and how these are connected on different continents through history. Candomblé is a syncretic Afro-Brazilian spiritual tradition, mostly with Yoruba roots, defined by anthropologist Paul Christopher Johnson as, quote, a Brazilian redaction of West African religions recreated in the radically new context of a 19th century Catholic slave colony. Candomblé involves the veneration of various deities, spirits, or gods. The orishas are, quote, divine intermediaries between God and man, who represent the powerful vibratory forces of nature, like wind, thunder, lightning, rain, and earthquakes. Some of the many orishas include Yemanja, the goddess of the sea, Shosi, lord of the forest and the hunt, Osai, lord of the botanical world, and Shango, the thunder god. Here you can see their Yoruba equivalents, as well as their Catholic counterparts. Just as Wole Soyinka was able to reconcile a seeming contradiction between the Yoruba traditional religion and Christianity in his later years, so too does Brazilian candomblé recognize such a marriage. Historically, it was via African slaves that Yoruban iconolatry was transported to Brazil, and those slaves were then exposed to the Catholic doctrines of the Portuguese settlers. As a result, the slaves were able to hide their own pantheist culture and identity in the Catholicism of the Brazilian Portuguese slave masters. So even in modern day Brazil, one still sees the merging of Catholic saints with the orishas, or gods, of candomblé. It is no accident then that Lange treats plants like characters in her novel, as can be seen in the examples that follow. Referring to the subtlety of fynbos, the protagonist, Maddie, describes the seed of an erica under the microscope thus: amplified, it fluffs up, perfectly round and covered in luxuriant, shockingly pink fur. Such a lascivious little seed. On screen, it would be played by a bombshell wearing a fluffy boa and feathered mules, the Marilyn Monroe of seeds, as drawn by Dr. Seuss. Seeds had propellers before plants did, because all seeds are made for travel. Some corkscrew great distances through the air, some gust like ghosts trailing tendrils. There are seeds that hitch rides in the guts of elephants, relying on pachyderm digestive aids to burn chinks in their carapaces. They'll sprout when they finally drop to earth, encased in nourishing dung. One has to stop and marvel at the brilliance and magic of nature when considering such methods of ensuring the continuation of plant life. This brings to mind the work of Michael Pollan, to whom Jackie Lange refers in her novel. The protagonist thinks to herself, quote, "We always assume that plant cultivation was directed to suit human tastes and desires. But what if the plants themselves had something to do with it?" That's what Michael Pollan suggested in The Botany of Desire. Poor busy bees. They thought they were deciding which flower to choose and which to avoid. But Pollan said the flower trays those bees selected over evolutionary millennia were designed by the plants themselves to manipulate bee vanity. Is it so crazy to suppose that we too are controlled by plants and not the other way around? Subsequently, Maddie asks herself, so did I pursue the star seed, or did the seed call me? Had I been summoned to bring it home? As Maddie continues her seed search, the reader learns a lot about candomblé when she attends various rituals in the terreiro, or temple, where she hopes to find the rare seed. Like other Brazilian mystery religions, The magic practices of candomblé revere nature and often make use of botanicals for healing purposes. Specific botanicals belong to specific orishas. Caroline Dow's book, Saravá, Afro-Brazilian Magic, is a worthwhile reference for those who are interested. For instance, in Dow's book, she explains the uses associated with the cola nut. The nut of this tree originally went into making Coca-Cola, incidentally, and the seeds smell like roses. This nut, associated with the Brazilian orisha named Oxalá, in Yoruba belief known as Obatala, has health benefits and ceremonial uses. The cola nut is well known in both Brazilian and African traditional ceremonies. Nigerian writer Chris Abani, at the beginning of his 2004 novel Graceland, writes, quote, "This is the cola nut. This seed is a star. This star is life. The star is us." Interestingly, the seed that Lange's protagonist seeks in The Seed Thief is also star-shaped. She says, "I described the seed that looked like a star. I even shared my hypothesis that it might be one of the plants beloved of Shango." But not only are seeds revered, so too are trees held to be most sacred. On her first day discovering the temple garden, we learn from Maddie that, quote, "There's something deeply comforting about tree contours. In floristic terms, Bahia, an old-growth forest, was as diverse as the fynbos back home. One researcher plotted 450 tree species in a 100 square meter patch of this forest. That's more than occurs in the whole of North America. While being shown the temple garden by a resident, Ze, Maddie notices a stand of trees. They stood like sentinels at the clearing edge. Glabrous leaves, dark green and waxy, clustered racemes of flowers, tinged with mauve, Newboldia laevis. Ze explains to Maddie that the tree is known locally as akoko. Interestingly, in Nigeria, it is known as the fertility tree or the tree of life. "It's the cousin of the one I'm interested in," says Maddie. "In West Africa, it's also called the boundary tree." Ze responds by saying that the Yoruba people also planted them in sacred places. You would find them outside the homes of kings. It is one of Shango's trees. Most of Shango's plants are tall trees. They are the ones that attract lightning. The Orisha Shango seen earlier is the thunder god, and iconography shows him sitting with a lion at his feet, and is thus also associated with Catholic Saint Jerome, who pulled a thorn from a lion's paw. Later, when Maddie talks to Tia Bettinia, she learns from her about the Iroko tree, a large hardwood originally from West Africa. Tia Bettinia says, "If you cut a branch from Iroko, you lose an arm. If you cut his trunk, you will lose a leg. There are those who are afraid even to look at Iroko for fear that they will be struck dead." Tia Bettinia then goes on to say to Maddie, "We should hug a tree every day. Every day we should hug a tree." The Brazilian candomblé practitioners like Tia Bettinia, who respect the orishas, are the same as the Yoruba people, who believe that inanimate beings like trees and plants have spirits that inhabit them, and such spirits should be appeased. This brings to mind a 2014 article by Wole Soyinka in which he says, I quote, "I must confess to being an unrepentant, even mildly obsessed tree advocate from childhood. He goes on to say that a tree, is a spirit, is ancestor, is guardian, is a deity, is shrine. In her book titled The Vegetative Soul, Elaine Miller writes in the introduction about the relationship between nature and the human creativity that includes the attempt to make sense of that same nature. This is perhaps what the author Jackie Lange is doing in The Sea Thief. Towards the end of the novel, Maddie says to Zé, I don't know what gives a plant its healing power, whether it's in the genetic coding of the plant, or the condition of the soil, or the wordless conversations they have with other plants in their area. We are not yet, perhaps never will be, the alchemists we long to be, not with the Petri dish and the lab coat, not with pure science alone, not without some kind of magic, I should have added. But if we don't save the plant, we'll never know. Indeed, as Elaine Miller notes in her book, quote, the plant is in touch with its origin. The plant is dispersed, multiple, in many places at many times, even as it remains rooted. This idea ties up very closely with the thinking of Michael Pollan, who was mentioned earlier. But now I return briefly to Deleuze and Guattari, whose concept of the rhizome, unlike the grand narrative of arborescence, has no beginning or end. Nonetheless, the root, radical, and rhizome are all exemplified in the image of a tree. Of course, Deleuze and Guattari go into much more detail concerning rhizomes, but just quickly, here is a brief summary. So, plant-like readings of literature can be rich and varied. In the conclusion of her book, The Vegetative Soul, Miller refers to ideas such as Jacques Derrida's notion of dissemination, Luce Irigarei's trope of efflorescence, and Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's articulation of the rhizome. Miller explains, a plant-like reading might unfold something like this. One may start with an idea or start with a very straightforward reading of a text. Then the seed metamorphoses into a stem, node, or leaf, and without any specific intention on the part of the author, it begins to transform itself into something else. Then a commentary or a poem or something overheard contributes to the reading, and it metamorphoses again. One's final reading will never be final, never exhaustive. In sum then, I would like to leave you with this bit of Deleuzoguattarian wisdom, sprinkled with a dash of Walt Whitman. Many people have a tree growing in their heads, but the brain itself is much more a grass than a tree. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. We are surely Deleuzoguattarized. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, time is against us. We wanted to consume everything from Mike to Guy up to you, Carol. And we are only going to allow very few questions, only 2. And we are sure that our online people are sending their questions or their comments, which we can see. So I'll gladly allow only 2 questions from the floor before we call our director to close the session. It has been a long day. We are surely, can you say that word again? Dilo. Thank you very much, Carol. You can see that we are tongue-tied, Carol. Thank you very much. My eyes are rolling to check where are the hands for questions. Wow. There's one. There's a light. There's one hand here. Thank you.
Thank you, particularly to Carol. It's very nice to see you again, love. It seems to me that you've done what most people do with Deleuze and Guattari, and I think they actively encourage this, which is to pick bits out of it and then utilize them, decontextualize for your own purposes. I've done the same, I can promise you, because I don't understand them at all. I think they are largely unintelligible and full of nonsense, but they have these nodes of wonderful, sparky thoughts, which just kind of drive one off in various directions. So I appreciate your method. It's probably what they would like.
Thank you.
They say a lot of other stuff about forests and plantations and the difference between them, and arborescence is not always a positive thing for them. So yeah, it's very complicated, isn't it? But just a brief comment. The Lange book looks like it would make a wonderful comparison with Richard Power's The Overstory, which has taken the world by storm. I think we'll hear a bit about it from Anthea tomorrow. A wonderful stylistic tour de force about plants and their life in very different mode in North America. Have you read it, Carol?
I have not, but it's on my list now.
Yeah, no, The Overstory is one of the best novels I've read for many years. Absolutely fantastic. So, yeah,
Great.
not a question, just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One more hand from the floor. Okay, let me take off my glasses in case I'm Deleuzoguattarized. Not to see you properly. Any hands? Looks like, yeah, we are fed with lots of information, knowledge and wisdom in the house, and I can see that people are really looking forward to the closing of the session. Now, I'm now stepping down to hand over to our director. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
We've had a fantastic day, haven't we? From start to finish. I'd now like to invite you all to join us for a quick walkabout the museum and a garden tour. Tom Jeffrey is going to do the walkabout of the museum. And just to let you know that our main exhibition is called Voices of the Land. And it's a big exhibition about the land and its physical and aesthetic manifestations in literature from the 1900s. Basil Mills will do a walkabout of the gardens. And for those of you who live in Grahamstown or who've come into Grahamstown, who were here on Saturday and who are here today, will not be surprised if I tell you that Makanda is situated at the confluence of many climatic zones. And so our garden has 4 biomes in it. So Basil will tell you more about that. I also want to tell you that Basil made that sculpture. We were seeing people in their papers were referring to art that is made from recycled materials, and Basil made that work of art, and he brought it in for the decorations, and I said, please put it on the stage. It's absolutely stunning. In less than 2 minutes, I'm going to tell you why Amazwi staff are a bunch of bunny huggers, to put it in how we laugh about ourselves. When Department of Public Works approached Amazwi to start building a new building for us, that was in 2010, the project manager assigned to the task, Dr. Ian Grayling from NDPW in Port Elizabeth, came to introduce himself to me. I was also new. He said, you know, girl, sorry, I won't imitate his voice. The Department of Public Works is pursuing environmentally sustainable building methods. How would you feel if we made your museum a green museum? I said, you couldn't have asked a better crowd. And I think that's, so, you know, we like to take credit as our idea. It was an idea, it came from the NDPW, but we embraced it, and we still embrace it. Now, what makes this a green museum? Well, when I talk about green, I mean accreditation from the Green Building Council of South Africa. And a building is accredited twice. The design is accredited, and then as built is accredited, because you, from your design and intentions, you might change your mind along the way, because it's not expensive, but it's not cheap to build green. You will see. When you go through our buildings, if you've been to the loo, the lights come on, the lights go off. The water comes on, the water goes off. The soundproofing here is made from recycled coconut shells. The kind of carpets we used have been made from recycled materials, and so on, so on, so on. I can go on about how every single part of this building is considered. The materials, my mind is escaping me. The kind of fumigants we've got as fire suppressants in the collections area, and we've carried it through into our day-to-day working life, into what I called a culture of zero waste. I'm intolerant of waste. Don't waste paper. Do you really need that? And what I've started doing as well, because I travel a lot for work, is the hotel that I'm going to stay at, does it have a green message? Does it say, we don't waste water, we're using environmentally friendly and animal cruelty-free cosmetics in the bathrooms? Those kind of things. So that we are permeated through our working life in the way, and what we try and show in our exhibitions, and in the way we work. Because museum practice itself, you know, the practice of museum work, if you don't hold your horses, it can be energy guzzlers. Now, I'm not saying museums aren't energy guzzlers. They are energy guzzlers. To maintain a museum of this standard guzzles energy, which is why people sometimes ask, why don't you go solar? And I say, you know what? It's just too much energy. But every light bulb is an LED light bulb. So in that a lot of energy, everything is considered to consume as little as possible. And we're very proud of it. So enjoy your tours with Tom and with Basil. So Basil is not only a garden, I mean, he's the education officer, and he's going to do the garden tour, but he's also an artist of extreme talent and repute. So thank you, Basil. Thank you, Tom. And then we're going to have some snacks afterwards, and the Graham College Steel Band will be here later to play for us. Are they in the? They're in the foyer. Okay. Okay, great. Enjoy yourselves. We won't keep you here too late tonight. Just hang around, enjoy yourself, have a bite to eat, enjoy some music, and then we're done. Thank you, National Arts Festival team, for getting us through the day, as they always do. Thank you, everybody. See you.